Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now, Spider-Man Supreme Deep Dive is out, and I'll be honest, initially after watching the deep dive the first time, I wasn't impressed or too fussed about this character. Rewatching the deep dive, I have changed my opinion quite significantly, and I actually think he is going to be quite an important part of the puzzle in MCOC. And let me explain that before we get over the rest of his abilities. For most part, most of his kit is kind of useless, with give and take and many ways how to interrupt it. His entire mechanic basically is based on giving opponent buffs and then nullifying them. But that means that, he's going to be gimped against champions who are nullify immune, or we have tons of nodes that punish nullifying and that prevent nullifying. And most importantly, he didn't really appear to be doing much besides, the generic hit opponent, do damage type of thing. But after watching it closer, there are about 3 things that really made me change my mind, possibly 4. The first one, before we go any further, is the way he deals with unblockables. You see, he does have these 3 blessings that he activates in different ways. One is by just applying spider seals on opponent by intercepting or by first medium attacks, then by dropping a heavy attack, and then by basically reaching 20 tokens, 20 buffs placed on opponent, effectively. And then he kind of starts doing damage. The first very important line here is, if a miss is triggered, this effect goes on cooldown for 20 seconds. So he has access to a miss, but that miss lasts only for 3 seconds. It has 20-second cooldown, which is not the greatest thing in the world. It's going to be nice, but not the most powerful miss mechanic for sure. But it says, if opponent has an unblockable buff, this ignores cooldown. So whilst opponents are unblockable against this little guy, he cannot be hit in any way, shape, or form. Now, this specifies as an unblockable buff, so unblockable passives will not work, so it's not going to be quite as effective as Miles in most of the situations. But at the same time, there is no timer, there is no camo, there is no need for opponent to throw special attack or anything of the sort. It just means that whilst opponent is unblockable or has an unblockable buff, he can't be hit. And that immediately screams broken, obviously, in any situation. Opponents are permanently or largely unblockable. Let's say the Diablo boss in Act 8. He starts unblockable, or like the Kraven EOP fight, and then if you knock him down with a special attack, yada yada yada, he goes unstoppable, and then you can switch it back by knocking down him with heavy attack. Well, here, you can just hit him, he will never hit you, let him throw his special attacks, all of them are going to miss, and he's going to be definitely a bit of a cheese champion. Right, so that's the first thing that I definitely noticed on the second viewing that has to be taken into account. He will have his cheese circumstances, his cheese nodes, his cheese situations, which is always valuable, because even if that is 1 out of 100 fights where you can benefit from this, the fact that we call it cheese means it's insanely powerful. So whenever we're going to see a champion with an unblockable buff for entire fight or most of the fight, this guy's going to be nuts. As long as he also doesn't prevent miss. Then the second thing is his other mechanic where he triggers it of a heavy attack. I believe, no, that's not the heavy attack mechanic. That's the that's in the first screenshot, where he reduces opponent's ability power rate for each buff, each unique buff on the opponent, but he gains whatever he reduces. So this, I think, is going to him open in kind of a niche, which currently is largely fulfilled by champions like America Chavez or Dr. Octopus. He's going to be extremely, extremely powerful in any situations where opponent has a large ability power gain, especially if they gain like at least 1 or 2 buffs. If they gain 2 buffs, he basically steals all of their power gain. Whereas America Chavez just reduces their power gain, for instance, and so do many other champions. And this will let him spam special attacks and just be super aggro. And that is much more common situation. Even now, when we're going to have Battlegrounds, we're going to have to deal with Flow if it works, unlike Protect. But the point is, you will want to trigger Flow on opponent, which you will do easily by critting, and then you're just going to gain a crap ton of power. So that is the second thing that I think he's going to be very, very powerful for. It's kind of like we all discovered how powerful America Chavez can be in the Spite Rise to Power meta offensively and so on and so forth. He's going to be gaining a lot of extra power, even if it's just 33% power reduction against opponents that do not have any buffs besides the one that he places himself. He also gets that power, thus he gets to access his special attacks and fasten the fight significantly without a need to, trigger or benefit from Mystic Dispersion. So I like this mechanic quite a lot. Again, it's not a mechanic that you will benefit from in every fight, but it is a very powerful mechanic, let's say, compared to America Chavez, where one of her blessings does it for 40%, but she doesn't gain anything from it. You need 3 blessings to basically reverse opponent's power gain. In here, if opponent has 2 buffs, you place one of your own. Opponent gains no power at all, and you gain all of it. So you can be much, much more aggressive. So I love that a lot. Also, incidentally, I think with that miss mechanic against unblockable champions, you'll be just able to spam like heavy attacks against the wall, which is always a fun thing. Right, so that's the second thing. I definitely noticed that he's going to be very, very good against champions who gain ability power. And the third thing is stemming from that heavy attack, where you get 20% of the buffs that, you get buffs that opponent gets with 20% potency. They are Furies, Precisions, Cruelties, Armor Ups, and Pierces. And this also definitely opens quite significant cheese potential, because these buffs last for 10 seconds, and he has a synergy where he has a chance to trigger those buffs twice, and he can end up gaining massive, massive gains in very specific matchups. Again, it's a niche situation that you will not be able to benefit from like all the time, but there will be plenty of champions that this is going to be quite OP for, letting you double and triple and quadruple your damage output if opponent has high buff acquisition, even if they are permanent, even if, they do not expire and you can't benefit from Mystic Dispersion. So this is also quite crazy, in addition to the fact that with level 1 you can basically make all of opponent's buffs meaningless, reduce their potency by 95%, and you can stack up quite crazy amount of damage here in specific matchups, especially obviously against Cosmics, as it should be. And then the last thing, the fourth thing, is he has a couple of insane synergies. So I do think he's going to have some niche uses in his base kit, and like some specific champions or specific nodes that he's going to do absolutely amazing against. I don't think he's going to be the best questing champion, day-to-day champion, like most Mystics are not, with exceptions of like Tigra and a few others. But I do think if you will give him a synergy team, then he can do crazy amounts of damage. And we're going to start with this one, where landing critical hits will give you an opportunity to land your Spider Seal buffs as well. That means you're going to have significantly improved ramp-up speed, especially if you're going to combine it with this synergy where Blessing of the Spider Totem also grants you 1500 critical rating. So that means when your Blessing of Spider Totem is going to be active, you're going to be critting a ton. At that point, you cannot place Spider Seals, but still it's going to significantly improve your damage output, because that is kind of like your damage phase. So I think in between these two synergies, he's going to have a massive, massive chance to nuke down regular opponents. And this synergy is the one that gives him a chance to trigger buffs twice. It's going to make him go insane in some certain buff-heavy matchups. But okay, let's get back to the actual kind of like ability breakdown now. I have held you guys for quite a long time. So basically, his intercepts and his medium attacks will grant opponent buffs that do nothing, up to 20 of them. And each unique buff on opponent, as I mentioned, reduces their ability power rate by 33%. So you can reverse it if they got 4 buffs or more, but again, even in generic situation where opponent has no buffs, you can give them 1, and that's gonna gimp their ability power rate and increase yours. Also, well, Spider Seal is nullified or expires. Mystic Dispersion does not grant power, but you deal a burst of damage based on the level of Mystic Dispersion, which is quite interesting. And that's one major worry kind of I have with this champion. He does have absolutely no real buff control. He can only nullify his own buffs that do nothing, and he can't nullify opponents' buffs at all. But at the very least, he can make them kind of pointless, or many of them kind of pointless. So there are definitely things that worry me about this character, and one of them is buff control. He virtually has none of it or very little of it. But he does benefit from opponents having quite a lot of buffs. So, moving forward, here we can see that he also will have that miss mechanic. Whenever opponent gains a Spider Seal, Unblockable or Unstoppable buff, Spider-Man gains a blessing from a astral form, causing incoming attacks to miss for 3 seconds. Spider-Man can block while this blessing is active unless the opponent has Unblockable buff. This effect cannot be refreshed. Nullifying Spider Seal buffs also triggers this blessing, and intercepting the opponent while the blessing is active grants 3 Spider Seal buffs. That's kind of like the quicker way to ramp up, where you want to intercept quite a bit. But intercepting like this is safe, because if you miss an intercept, your Spider Astral Form blessing is going to activate, opponent's going to miss, and it's just going to, start the 3-second timer. So I do think this is quite a good safety net. I don't think this ability in most situations is gonna be frequent and aggressive enough to play the champion like Ghost or Kitty Pryde or whoever. I think this is a miss mechanic that's more similar to Professor X miss mechanic, where it can be used as a failsafe and also as like a periodical offensive utility. Unless you're going up against somebody who's unblockable, in which case it's going to be a cheese factor fiesta. Right. So, moving on, we have a Spider Totem Blessing. So whenever you place 20 of these Spider Seals on opponent, or whenever they basically get 20 buffs, you enter this blessing of Spider Totem that lasts for 20 seconds, but that you can pause for 1 second every time you nullify Spider Seal, or whenever they gain a buff. First, medium attack, now instead of granting them Spider Seal buff, is going to nullify Spider Seal buff, inflicting a burst of energy damage. You're also going to gain massive attack increase, but you're going to lose almost all combat power rate, but you're going to get Doctor Strange-like power gain. So this is your damage phase, where you're meant to nullify, intercept as much as possible, deal a burst of damage, benefit from the Fury. If you have synergy, benefit from the crit rate. Throw your special attack to inflict massive damage thanks to benefiting of this attack increase. Again, not too much in terms of utility right here, aside from that combat power rate thing from before. But it is going to be quite effective damage phase. And then heavy attack grants Blessing of the Web for 15 seconds. When the opponent gains Fury, Precision, Cruelty, Armor Up, Regeneration, or Pierce buffs, Spider-Man gains the same buff with 20% potency or 2.2% max health potency in terms of regeneration for 10 seconds. And as a defender, you just randomly start gaining this blessing. So this is kind of Loki-esque or Rogue-esque ability, where you do not nullify opponent's buffs, but you gain whatever they gain. And again, in certain matches where opponent gains a ton of Fury, Precision, or Cruelty, this is going to be quite crazy. Or Regeneration. So it's going to be interesting to see where we can find use for this. Now, Special Attack 1 is the only kind of like actual quote-unquote pseudo buff control that he really has, is where you can inflict Curse of the Web on the opponent, and that's going to basically gimp all of their buffs by 95%. Like potency of Fury, Precision, Cruelty, Armor Up, Regeneration, and Pierce basically lose 95% of their potency. And that's a very interesting way how to deal with buffs, but again, it's not nullification. It doesn't benefit from Mystic Dispersion. He's one kind of like a champion where you do want to run Mystic Dispersion for the sake of burst damage, but at the same time you will not benefit from Mystic Dispersion in most situations, like at all, unless opponent have buffs that do expire naturally. But still, at least there is something kind of like limit the buffs that they get. As we can see that there are quite significant levels of burst damage that you can gain here. And level 3 is kind of pointless. Level 3 basically inflicts root on opponent, and every time you make contact with the root, you give them a spider seal and you power steal from them. But again, level 3 is not important to his rotation in my opinion, and that is a good thing. It's not completely useless, but it's also not needed or necessary. And signature ability, and it basically gives buffs and potency increases to all of your 3 blessings. As in, you gain more max power whenever you trigger your miss. You gain potency of burst damage, so this is going to be quite important right there as well. And Blessing of the Web increase the potency of granted buffs by 50%, so you get 30% furies, 30% cruelty, so on and so forth. So again, signature ability is going to be quite significant in my opinion. And he definitely does seem that he will want a high sig and high levels of abilities. Moving on, just some fight examples of fights that he does seem to have quite good damage, but let's break down the synergies. So granting Spider Seal buffs to an opponent that has no buff or only Spider Seal buffs inflicts a burst of 10% attack damage and energy damage. I think this is kind of whatever. I don't think it's important synergy. Against Symbiote Supreme, when Stagger expires without nullifying a buff, he gains 15 genetic potential. I think this is nice. I think this kind of speeds up Symbiote Supreme in non-buff heavy matchups. At the same time, I think you're still not going to want to use Symbiote Supreme in non-buff heavy matchups, so I don't think it does too much. And special attacks inflict energy vulnerability debuff, reducing it by 1200 for 7.5 seconds for Sorcerer Supreme. I think this can be quite cool. I think this can be quite good in giving much more damage to Sorcerer Supreme, and I do want to test this one out in near future. Now we're going to have from the contest, and here are quite few cool things now. Critical hits from light or heavy attacks grant Spider Seal buff to the opponent. This is very good for Spidey because it's going to let him ramp up quicker. I think it's quite nice, quite important. Overseer gains immunity to neutralize. I think it's kind of meh. Well, I mean, eventually in future, it might be important, but right now there are 3 champions with neutralize, and against 2 of those champions, against one of those champions, which is Tigra, you don't get neutralized unless you get hit anyways. And against Wiccan, you can avoid getting neutralized if you do not parry the guy. So it's primarily against Rintra, I suppose. But you're probably going to get more neutralized champions in future. So maybe the synergy grows in value in the future. It almost definitely will, but right now it's nothing too crazy. When a symbiote buff is consumed, Venom the Duck has a 25% chance to retrigger it, whatever. Don't care about Venom the Duck too much. Venom Bull gains special lock immunity. Again, it's fairly specific synergy. I don't think it's particularly important at this time. And Morningstar Special 2 deals extra burst damage, half potency burst of energy damage per captured soul. That's quite nice. That's going to give Morningstar even more damage output. So when her level 2s burst. So it's kind of like a win more situation. I don't think it's super important, but it's kind of neat to have to get some more damage from Morningstar. Now this one with villain-verse champions. Now this is quite important for Sorcerer Spidey, gaining quite massive crit rating buff. I think it's quite nice. When it comes to Kraven, he has access to Infuriate whenever he triggers a trap. I think any time you have access to Infuriate, it's quite good. So that's nice, but I don't think it's going to help Kraven enough. Against Vulture, basic charges have 25% chance to grant plus 10 Chitauri charges. I think it's fine, nothing too special. Against Carnage, increase the permanent mutation buffs max stack to 8. I think this is quite nice, one of synergy to have, and I do like this one. And Electro one is probably the best one. When attacking, 20% chance to inflict a shock passive on himself and the opponent, dealing 30% of the attack per energy. And the reason why this is so cool, because whenever Electro gets shock placed on himself, he gains attack. So obviously Electro needs more help than that, but this is a very neat, nice, and quite clever synergy that I do actually like quite a bit for Electro. And now the Spideys, when buffs granted by Blessing of the Web have 25% chance to retrigger twice. Good. It's nice. I like this one. I think it can be quite cheesy in sometimes. Spider-Man 2099, increase the debuff pause. I think it's neat. I don't think it's game-changing, but it's nice. Spider-Gwen, Enderway duration from Special 1 lasts longer. It's whatever-ish. I mean, I don't think it's too important. Spider-Man Stealth Suit, however, evading or dodging purifies 1 debuff. I think this is very good, especially combination with Scorpion synergy. Spider-Man can become a powerhouse if he has the fairly persistent ability to purify debuffs and then pose his own debuffs. I think this is kind of building up Stealth Suit Spidey into a synergy powerhouse of a champion. Quite good. And the last one, reduced EMP webshot cooldown for Stark Enhanced Spidey. I think is also quite neat. Not absolutely game-changing, but nice to have. So overall, as I said in the beginning, I do think this champion will have a lot of value. Maybe not as a day-to-day champion, maybe not as your main Mystic champion or something like that. But whenever you're going to deal with opponents with large effect power gain, or whenever you're going to deal with Unblockable, I think he's going to be absolutely bonkers. And then I think in the rest of the situations, he's going to be fine. He's going to be probably slightly above average Mystic in kind of like a generic fight, which is perfect, which is how I want champions to be designed. Not one champion that just steamrolls everything, but where they have their little niches, their little boxes where they absolutely shine. And then obviously I do think he's going to synergize together quite well with specific matchups being absolutely bonkers. And I also do find a lot of value in that. So here we are. Let me know what you guys think about this Spidey. I'm actually quite interested in both champions that are coming out next month. And who knows? Hopefully, when next Feature 6-star comes out, I'll get some of them. See you guys. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about the next